Welcome back to another episode of It's Not You, It's the Media. Today we are going to be discussing about Indian cinema's battle with censorship. We have an exciting guest, Anna Vetticad, a journalist who is going to be joining us in a few minutes. But really, the reason why we're discussing this theme and this topic today is because at Polis we've been really thinking about what it means for us to think about censorship. But more importantly, what does it mean for us to think about cinema, film as a place of politics? Place where governments across the world have often laid siege to this place to occupy it. Also, because it's something that we've been doing a lot of work with at Polis Project with Madhuri heading the culture vertical. Madhuri, what kind of work have we been getting? What kind of stories have you been telling in this very particular focus on cinema and censorship, but also how the new generation is viewing this in terms of politics?
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Suchitra. That's a really interesting question, actually, because as you said, films have become such a contested site now, and there's so many people trying to claim ownership. At the Polis Project, there are two pieces that I particularly want to draw attention to. One is about Veer Zara, and it was re-released, I think, on the occasion of its 20th anniversary or something like that in India, and to great commercial success, as in people were flocking to the cinemas to watch it again. And the piece examines sort of nostalgia and the Hindi film industry, and how this story of not just an interfaith romance, but an inter-country India-Pakistan romance could possibly exist, when the movie came out 20 years ago, and could it exist today? And it stars Shah Rukh Khan, who plays a Sikh um, fighter in the Indian army, and Preeti Zinta, who is a Pakistani woman who fall in love, and it's not a star-crossed lovers kind of a situation. But the film talks about how in that time movies were used as a vehicle for sort of creating this idea of a homogenous India in a different way, and that was done through Shah Rukh Khan's character. Even though he's Sikh, he really barely engages with that identity at all, and it only keeps getting upfronted in the film how much of a Hindustani he is, how much of a Hindustani he is. So that was kind of, subsuming the minority religion within the larger banner of Hinduism, even though it was done very delicately and very beautifully. And even though now when people look back, what they will think is, oh, a film about a cross-border romance could never be made again. But there was also this subliminal messaging that was happening, and the younger generations are kind of viewing it with a lot more criticality, which is really amazing and interesting. And perhaps it's because of the burgeoning number of horrible propaganda films that are so on the nose that people are just like, we can't watch this anymore. There's no way that we can watch films in a way where we can siphon the politics out, so to speak. And the other article I will quickly talk about is about the Nigerian film industry, which also, to the theme of censorship, has a very strict censor board. And how, given this, like the proliferation of streaming platforms like Netflix, etc., how Nigerian filmmakers are they create very politically charged cinemas, but they're resorting to like allegory and symbolism to tell stories of oppression, and of governmental failure, and all of that. But saying the thing without saying the thing, whether it's through symbolism or straight up allegory, but in a way where everybody who watches knows what the film is about, but it just gets through the censor board. So that's
Yeah.
kind of, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's yeah. I mean, it's an age-old problems, right? Cinema and censorship, and we can call it soft power or the power of culture to shape minds and hearts in powerful ways. And governments and right-wing governments in particular, always knowing the power of this popular, extraordinary, collective
Exactly.
medium, right? And I think what's interesting, of course, is there has always been forms of censorship. I remember growing up, always remembering a film has been censored for something sexual or something, something or the other. But I think what is interesting now with with our current Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and what that has brought about is a synthesization of a kind of obsession with religion. And India, I will argue, has, we all agree, has never been the great secular country, but we actually espoused some values, or
Sure.
aspired, or something like that. But now the idea, that whole messaging has slipped away, and films are really either being pulled up for something that offends Hindus, or or then the counter is a sort of extremely propagandist type of film, which really positions the Muslim, the figure of the Muslim, as a figure of a terrorist, as a figure of unruliness, disruptive, violent, all those kinds of things. So while these themes were there, they have really now become upfront and center. And I think what will be interesting to ask Anna, who did a grand investigative report and looked at this, is the ways in which it's leading to a set of responses that are troubling. On one level, there's a lot of self censorship that comes about, and the other level is bending, bending down and laying prostrate before the government and saying, I'm going to make the kind of films you love, and I'm
Hmm.
going to end up with the, becoming a powerful person with the prime minister in my pocket, and things like that. And we're getting a lot of really grotesque films. And then we've had and I think, Suchitra, you know more about the Tamil film industry, and then also the Malayalam film industries, which have been subversive. But then we have these pan India films now, like RRR, which was venerated at the Oscars and was this considered this global hit. And it's a preposterous film where you are now seeing even the southern filmmakers, capitulating to this madness. So
Right.
I don't know where we're headed. It's very disturbing.
But another thing that I also want to push back and think about is that often the there is this idea that the Tamil and Malayalam film industries are largely more subversive, that they are the bulwark against fascism. But well, I do agree that there are those pockets that exist in these industries, but I'm also want to talk about the Hema Committee report. How egalitarian or truly a bulwark you can be when these industries are also deeply misogynistic.
So, Chitra, can you say a little bit about what the HEMA committee report is?
The Hema Committee report is a report that was put out, which was specifically focused on the Malayalam film industry. It kind of, it's actually not even as I wish they had done. They were, a little bit more scathing in their report, but even given the context, this really just names the misogyny, the sexual abuse, the different kind of abuse that various actresses in the film industry went through. It's one of its kind. It has its detractors. It has its people who call it a feminist document. But in reality, the document becomes important. No matter what you think of the document, it becomes important because for the first time, we have a documentation that really does try to paint a broader picture.
Mhm.
And with this happened in the Malayalam film industry, what you really saw was people start asking questions about the Tamil film industry, which is
Uh-huh.
often seen and also performs a certain kind of they do believe that they are the bulwark against fascism. But the Tamil film industry is also deeply misogynistic. And it's deeply misogynistic in ways that I don't think we can begin to describe. And one of the things that
Mm.
I do want to mention is there is this very famous, celebrated film called Punnagai Mannan, directed by
Uh-huh.
K. Balachandar with Kamal Hassan in it. The young actress who's in the film who comes as a cameo, her name is Rekha. When she was 16, she was a heroine of the film. And many years later, she then spoke about the fact that both Balchandar and Kamal had colluded to kiss her on screen without her permission. So there
What?
is a kiss that happened on screen,
Gross.
and then that was reported. But the reality is that even after this explosive revelation, I don't see reporters reporting about Kamal Hassan in this way. I don't
Yeah.
see him or any of these heroes who have a long history of misogyny actually being held accountable. And instead, what you really saw from the Tamil film industry was this thing that no, 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 there's no misogyny in our industry. So those are
Mhm.
also things that I really want to think about. But I do think that Hindutva relies on misogyny and fascism to spread its
Absolutely.
tentacles. So I'm really looking forward to this
Yeah.
conversation with Anna.
Yeah, and
Right.
to kind of promote ourselves here. I mean, I think our episode where we covered a lot of this about how India is developing a fascist aesthetic gets at the this sort of muscular,
Right.
patriarchal, violent male being a sort of figure of attractiveness, a figure to be glorified. So I think there's a lot of that we've covered in that. But I see Anna waiting in the studio. So before we beam her up, I'm just going to very quickly say something about her. We're very excited to have her. So Anna Vetticad is a journalist who's been covering the Indian film industry since 1994. We have come to value and rely on her super important, politically nuanced analysis of films, her profiles of film industry folks. I love her Salman Khan profile, for example, and her long form investigations. She's written for numerous publications, has received awards and fellowships, and she even has a book with a pretty cool title which chronicles her journey with Indian cinema, and it's called The Adventures of an Intrepid Film Critic. So let's welcome Anna, our intrepid film critic, to the show.
Anna, thanks for being here. You've done this for many many years, and tell us a little bit about how you became a film critic, how you got interested and invested in movies, and a little bit more about what this past few years has been like for you.
Well, I just realized I've completed in April. I will complete 31 years in the profession. So it's been a long time.
Amazing. My gosh.
Thank
Congratulations.
you, thank you. When I started out, I knew I wanted to be a journalist. I wasn't sure what beat I should be on, so I tried a little bit of this and a little bit of that. In fact, I remember one of my earliest reporting assignments was that I went to Punjab with a colleague, a male colleague, and we posed as a couple who wanted to have children, but we wanted to conceive only a female child. And there were preconception diagnostic techniques being offered at that time, illegally, of course, because sex determination of fetuses had been banned in India. So,
Mm.
yes, that was completely, in a sense, if you look at it, it was far removed from what I'm doing now. But in a sense, it's not, because, I believe that all journalism is all good journalism is political journalism. And whether we're looking at social trends or the environment or sports or even food, you can't write about food in India right now without
Right.
possibly potentially running into trouble with the right wing. And even the article that you mentioned, the investigation that I've done into India's film censorship system and what's going on under the right wing, they're targeting filmmakers who are showing families from the majority community having chicken. So now it's no longer,
Oh,
yeah, so it's no longer just sensitivity towards the consumption of beef on screen, but also the consumption of any form of meat. So there's a certain, so it doesn't matter what beat you're on. This is my opinion. I feel this very strongly, and I really want all young journalists to understand that all good journalism is political journalism. You may not be covering political parties, and frankly,
right.
people who cover political parties could end up being very apolitical because they take a safe line, or they selectively, I mean, we're seeing the media in India, large sections of the media capitulate before this government, just as we're seeing a large section of the film industries, but particularly the Hindi film industry, capitulate before this government. So
Right.
I think I'm grateful for the journey that I've had as a journalist. I must say, though, that the past 10 years have been very difficult for any journalist who is not bowing before this present government, any journalist who's doing the basic job we're all supposed to do as journalists, which is to question those in power. Whether
Right.
it's those in power in society, I mean, whether you're questioning the government or the censor board, which is an arm of the government in a sense, or social norms, patriarchy, the caste system. It's just been very difficult for any journalist who is not pro establishment, and
Mhm.
in fact, a person who isn't openly pro government and pro the present prime minister and the
Did,
president.
did you fall into did you fall into film writing, or like people think of it as so frivolous, like film review, book review. What is, that doesn't mean anything, how did you, you are saying such extraordinary important things now, but when you got your first film review assignment, did you think of it as a vehicle of change, as you have made it a vehicle for telling the truth?
Well, the thing is, maybe because of the way my parents brought me up and because of the way we constantly discussed politics at the dinner table, even when I was a very little girl, and I may not have known words like feminism, but these were subjects
Right.
that we were discussing: religion, politics, history, and I knew no other way of looking at the arts. I could never look at the arts as just something that's frivolous. This is not to say that I'm, a sad, boring person who is never entertained. But that's not the point. I find myself incapable of not noticing the points that films are making. And I don't think that there is such a thing as a mindless film. Very often,
I
Join
agree.
the club, join the
I
club.
agree.
thank you. It's
I agree.
nice to be with like-minded people who understand that, even I think, in fact, our sense of humor reveals our politics and our beliefs sometimes much more than
Definitely.
the supposedly serious speeches and articles that we write. I think the things we say off the cuff reveal who we are much more than the considered, carefully thought out speeches. So
Mhm.
I think that's the way I approached it from the beginning. I did for a very long time find myself being told that I'm too serious, and that I should chill. And you know how it is when you are a. I found myself increasingly being drawn to the arts and specifically films. And when you are a young woman who's even halfway attractive, uh, interested in the arts, you are told very, you hear very, you hear things that now would be illegal probably, but is actually
Right.
so unacceptable to tell a young woman, you're pretty, why don't you want to go and cover parties, everybody wants to meet you, why are you being
It's
so
horrible.
serious?
What?
And it takes a lot of
Gross.
strength. Exactly, but as a young person, as a young woman, it takes a lot of strength to recognize that that supposed compliment is inappropriate, and it is not being given to you in a space where that in a place where that person has a right to be talking to you like that, or that they're trivializing your work. They are telling you that your looks matter more than your intellect, or that a person with brains and a person who with the ability to be a great journalist, somehow that your looks are contradicting your abilities. So it took a very, very long time for me to be able to fight to get the spaces that I wanted. And anyway,
Absolutely.
while I was entering journalism, the Indian media was also getting into a place where every mainstream newspaper had started running color supplements. Otherwise, gossip journalism was the purview of film magazines, which were seen as non-serious journalism. But over here in the 1990s,
Correct.
newspapers were starting party pages, mainstream national newspapers. So again, one was being pushed in that direction. Fortunately, I had
Mm.
a colleague called Madhu Jain who was working, who was doing very interesting cinema writing, and she was writing about painting and sculpture and all of that. So I knew that I was not a total. I knew that I wasn't a wacko, and that I wasn't first person in the world who thought that you can approach the arts like this. So I saw
No, I
Mm.
mean,
open.
you not being the first person to view films like that, what we're seeing with, and what we've always seen with the right wing is that they know that these so-called mindless films can really have a political agenda, and they've been
Mm.
wielding that for a long time while telling other people to suspend their judgment and suspend their politics, and you're such a bore for looking into the hidden meaning of films or whatever it is. But that's exactly what they've been doing, right? That's what they've been doing. I mean, sure, propaganda now has taken such an overt overt sort of tone. But for a very long time, for since time immemorial, the right wing has known the political power of culture and film, while trying to dissuade
In
us
fact, I'm
from
so glad
seeing
you
that,
said
you
that,
know.
because I believe that, there is a lot of condescension. I don't know how it is in the American media, but in the Indian media, there are still sections of journalists who are condescending towards those who cover the arts and culture and film, because they think it's not serious journalism. And I want to tell them that terrorists and despots have understood something that some of these journalists have not, which is that the arts have immense reach and have the power to influence people. And right now, what you're seeing in India is a government that has recognized that and has worked very hard to use cinema as a tool to influence people. And after my article in Article 14 was published, within a short while, there is this film called Chava that's out in theaters. Right now we have a debate going on about a Mughal emperor who died in 1707. And there is this constant effort, and this has been on, of course, pre the Narendra Modi era, to conflate Indian Muslims with Muslim invaders and to conflate Indian Muslims with Pakistan. And so now the whole this attempt in the past 10 years to constantly make films where the Muslim is the villain in a very stereotypical way, and if you're showing a Muslim emperor, in any case the discourse has conflated the average Muslim with those Muslim emperors. So it's not just one person you're talking about in your film. As a filmmaker, you know exactly what messaging is going out when you make that film. So dictators, the right wing, terrorists know what the mainstream media's so called serious journalists have still not fully understood.
Yeah, right. Thanks for that, Anna. I just wanted to pick up on something that you were talking about with your Article 14 long form essay on censorship, which was a very, very interesting read, wonderful reporting. And I was hoping that you could tell us and our listeners how is censorship working in India? How has it worked and how is it
Like
working
most
now?
things that are happening in India right now, it's not like censorship. It's not like religious fundamentalism began only in 2014, nor did majoritarianism begin in 2014. Film censorship in India didn't begin in 2014. We've had a central board of film certification for decades. It's been a controversial board to the extent that we generally refer to it as a censor board, because it doesn't give guidelines. It's not like PG 13, etc. What it does is, even if it gives a film an adult rating, the board may still insist on cuts, because this board thinks that Indian adults are incapable of deciding how much sex they want to see, or the wording, the kind of abuse they're willing to hear on film, on screen, etc. So it's always been controversial. But the investigation that I conducted, that was published on Article 14, is about the difference between pre 2014 and now, the Modi era. For listeners outside India, 2014 is the year that the Bharatiya Janata Party came to power, and they've been running the central government ever since then. So the investigation is into the differences between censorship before and after the year 2014. And the big difference is that at the moment, in certain cases, now India makes anywhere between 1,600 and 2,500 films a year. We're the country that produces the largest number of films in the world. Clearly, Indians love cinema. That should be evident from the number of films we make. And therefore, the BJP and the larger Sangh Parivar, which is the grouping of parties that are affiliated to the BJP, have recognized the power of cinema. And there have been so many protests, cases against people who made films that were anything that were perceived as anti-establishment, not necessarily just in terms of criticizing this government, but even just questioning the definition of what Hinduism is, or showing a practice, socio-cultural practices on screen that this particular political grouping does not want to be known as socio-cultural practices of people who identify as Hindu. So, for instance, you know that there is this constant effort to claim that all Hindus don't eat beef. All right. Now, the Hindi film industry, you will never hear the word beef on screen. But the Malayalam and Tamil film industries, which are in any case vastly bolder than the Hindi film industry and have been pushing back against this government, I mean, it's routine to show beef consumption in these films. You would think that that's what the CBFC would go after or that right wingers would go after. But no, I've come across examples, and this I have named some of them in my investigation into the in my article. People, filmmakers being censored for showing chicken consumption on screen. Now you understand. Now there's a homogeneous Hinduism that the present governing party is trying to claim is the Hinduism. But like every major religion in the world, and certainly Hinduism more so than most, this is it's a heterogeneous society. Practices from Kashmir to Tamil Nadu, they differ, but there have been so many protests, violence, threats of violence, income tax raids, court cases, police cases against filmmakers, that large sections of the film industries in India, one of the filmmakers told me, he called it a censor board in the mind. He said people are self, and that is really what is happening right now, to the extent that in some cases it feels like almost there is no need for a censor board anymore because people are self censoring to that extent. But it must be said, and I think it's very important to state this, that the film industry in India that has totally disgraced itself in these past 10 years is the Hindi film industry. There has been pushback from independent filmmakers, from documentary filmmakers. The Malayalam and Tamil industries have been really pushing back. They have been protesting. They have been portraying culture in the accurately, and it's not that this governing party is not trying to win over filmmakers in these states. It's definitely making that effort. And one filmmaker told me during the course of my investigation, which was, I spent about 11 months on this investigation, and he said that the situation in Tamil Nadu at the start of my investigation was different from when I ended it. He said that censorship committee, he said they are getting more and more aggressive with filmmakers. Initially, he said they were not getting too aggressive with filmmakers. They were trying to influence them. But by the end of the 11 months during the course of my investigation, he said that the aggression that is directed at filmmakers by censor examining committees is far greater. So
Yeah.
that's the defining element in this post
I'm with you, Anna, when you say that the Hindi film industry has really disgraced itself and continues to. I mean, our great Ayodhya spectacle of all the Hindi film stars, going there, paying their homage to the PM and all that was uh, embarrassing, shameful, but a real consolidation of political power with cinema power. But what about something like RRR? I mean, you're talking about the Tamil and Telugu film industries in laudable ways. I just want to press on that a little bit there.
resistance primarily, if we're seeing it, it's coming from four areas: documentary filmmakers, independent filmmakers of all industries, the Tamil industry, and the Malayalam industry, the Tamil language and the Malayalam language industries. I'm saying, specifying that for the benefit of viewers outside India. But yes, of course, RRR is playing along with a certain narrative that the right wing in India wants to establish, which is that, I mean, the two people who are the leads in that film are real life
Mhm.
people who never actually met in real life. And
Right.
one of them was an upper caste, but an activist for tribal rights. The other was a tribal himself and also a tribal rights activist. This film is showing the tribal rights activist, who is a tribal himself, being subservient and worshipful towards the upper caste man. Now, if you
Mhm.
are saying this is a fiction, now the filmmaker's logic is this is a fictionalization of these two men's lives. They never met in real life anyway. So, this is what his imagination has. This is what has come up in his imagination. So it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's like if
Yeah.
you were to show a fictional representation of Martin Luther King meeting Donald Trump, and you show Martin Luther King being worshipful towards Donald Trump. Why would you do that? If you do that, you're revealing your mindset, right?
I
Because
know.
the character played by NTR Jr. in the film, if you read about him in real, if you read accounts of the real person that he was playing, he's supposed to be a feisty man who educated himself, who he was not illiterate, but in this film he is shown requesting the character played by Ramcharan to educate him. And it's there is a scene in which one of them is seated at a table, the other is and he's the upper caste guy is trying to be very benevolent and behaving as though he sees everyone as equal, but this guy played by NTR Jr. doesn't want to even sit at the table. So this is very much, the narrative that the present establishment wants to put out is not just about Hinduism, but it's also a very masculinist narrative, plus Hinduism, plus upper caste. And I
Yeah.
want to tell you about a Hindi film called Kesari, because it wasn't discussed too much in this, while. I mean, in India, among liberals, maybe it didn't, I don't know why it didn't make news, but again, it shows Muslim freedom fighters fighting against a Sikh regiment of the British Army in India. And that film, now this is a true episode in Indian history. It's about the Battle of Saragiri that took place
Mm.
while the British had colonized India. And the Muslim freedom fighters are projected as evil, they are projected as anti-Indian. They are the villains of the piece. And the Sikh regiment that is fighting in the British Army, in the British Army in India, are portrayed as freedom fighters. The kind of twisting of history, and it's ridiculous because gaslighting takes on a whole new meaning here because facts are being presented on screen. You are being told on screen that the Sikh regiment is fighting for the British. Yet you are also being told that that battle laid the ground for India's first war of independence. But the pushback, I mean, while the Hindi film industry is self-censoring, films from other industries that have chosen to push back are facing flack either from the censor board or from the right wing. And I began my investigation with a Tamil film called Nasir, which has never been released in India because it was submitted to the censor board and then just disappeared. And it's a film about rising Hindutva in Tamil Nadu and how a Muslim man is the Muslim protagonist is affected by it.
I do want to come back and talk to you about the southern industry. You said that the Malayalam and the Tamil film industries have been pushing back. But within these industries, there is also this big toxic culture of misogyny. There is this culture of the venerated superstar or the hero worship. Often, what really bothers me is the way in which the misogyny, the patriarchy, the way in which the male actors themselves perform a certain kind of role has never quite been reported the way it should be. Often, these figures are reported as humble and nice and sweet and disciplined. But in reality, that is not the case. I mean, there is a very deeply problematic toxic culture. Can you talk to us about that?
Sure, of course. I mean, the Telugu, Tamil, Malayalam film industries, the Kannada film industries, they're very male dominated industries. The Hindi film industry is too. It's extremely male dominated. The distinction I will draw there is that the Hindi film industry is more sophisticated. The men of the Hindi film industry are more sophisticated in their public pronouncements. And but I will say that the misogyny that is seen in Tamil, Telugu, and Kannada cinema is it has no equal in the Hindi film industry. The average Tamil, Telugu, Kannada film is so misogynistic and so patriarchal, and I wouldn't say that about the average Hindi film. So, in terms of representation on screen, of course, we're choosing between various bad situations. But in terms of representation on screen, I would say that the Hindi film industry is vastly better than these three industries. Now, the Malayalam film industry um, gives the appearance of being much. It is much better in terms of the representation of women on screen. But the reason why I say much better is because the others are so bad. A huge number of Malayalam films are completely male dominated, and the kind of toxic masculinity that has been portrayed by two of the biggest stars of Malayalam cinema of the past few decades, which is Mammootty and Mohanlal, is I mean, they make their worst films make the Hindi film industry look good. However, the reason why the Malayalam industry has a better image in the rest of the country is that when it does choose to explore patriarchy, when it does choose to portray misogyny as misogyny rather than romanticizing it, it does a better job than any other industry in the country. So, a film like The Great Indian Kitchen, which is a Malayalam film that was about the life of a woman in an upper caste Hindu patriarchal, very very conservative household, and it has been remade in Hindi and it has been remade in Tamil. The Hindi remake so completely dilutes the original story because they're just afraid to show the intersection of religion and patriarchy, which is one of the most important elements in the Malayalam film. But because of excellent films like The Great Indian Kitchen, the Malayalam industry ends up having a great image outside Kerala, because outside Kerala, the Indian audiences in the rest of the country tend not to watch Malayalam cinema's worst output. They tend to watch the best of Malayalam cinema and therefore identify all of Malayalam cinema with the best of Malayalam cinema.
I just wanted to push back a little on the term Iranization. I think Geo Baby, the director of Great Indian Kitchen, used it, and some of what that made me think is Iranian filmmakers, because of the extraordinary tyrannical censorship laws, make like this extraordinary cinema, right? We know that, we study them, teach them, whatever, all that kind of stuff. And I just wonder if India is headed in this direction. Are you seeing a sort of bulwark of resistance? Are you seeing that we are going to end up also with some of the most incredible films? Like, I'm thinking of someone like Jafar Panahi, right, who was in house arrest and made this film, drawing the set into his thing, just experimental, stunning, glorious stuff, right? So are things changing? Is the tyranny going to bring about a resistance? How do you see the landscape evolving?
Well, firstly, like I said, the kind of self censorship that one is seeing, it's most disheartening. And to the extent that I'll just give one of the examples I've mentioned in my article, because I do hope that your listeners will read the article, because there's so much that I've put into it. But one example of a character who was originally named, well, in Kiran Rao's Lapata Ladies, the leading man was originally named Shiv in the story. And the production team and everyone, when they were sitting together and writing the script and going over it, they realized that it's just because the name Shiv was not, it was not fundamental to his character. It was just a name like Ram or Vijay or Ajay. They decided to change it to Deepak just to be on the safe side, because you just never know who might be offended and whether that will lead to court cases or theaters being stoned and things like that. So they played it safe. Now, and I've given numerous such examples in the article. However, when Geo Baby spoke of the Iranization of India, he was referring to the kind of suppression that Iranian filmmakers have to fight. And he himself says filmmakers in India will therefore find ways out. He's very optimistic. I was at the premiere of a film recently, which I'm not going to name, but the filmmaker faced certain strictures, and he found a way around it, which is he's found a very intelligent way around it. He's saying exactly the same thing, but technically, in theory, he's not doing what he was asked not to do by those who censor Indian films. And he said at that premiere, he said, I took my cues from the great Iranian filmmakers who are fighting. Fighting the kind of repression that they are facing, and we are heading towards that. So I took my cues from them. So yes, there are, even within the Hindi film industry, to be fair, there are pockets of resistance. But the resistance over time, if this government ends up being even more aggressive than it already is, then filmmakers who are openly, overtly resisting may all find the need to go the way of Iranian filmmakers. But the thing with the two states that I keep bringing up, Malayalam cinema and Tamil cinema, the reason why the resistance from those two states is so strong is also because there's more unity among the filmmakers. Now, if there's a large number of them resisting, each one recognizes that they are safer as a result of that. But again, one of the people I interviewed told me that the problem with the Hindi film industry is that it's been too corporatized. Whereas in the Tamil and Malayalam film industries, there's still studios that are making films, and that's their primary business. It's not like a person who is running an e-commerce website and also running a production company and also running a cement company, which is how she sees the Hindi film industry, and that's the reason why she thinks that there's next to zero resistance to Hindi cinema. I'm hopeful. I'm eternally optimistic. I think if in the present circumstances where I know what the news media is going through, the hell that the news media are being put through, so I can only, I mean, despite the fact that I'm constantly in touch with filmmakers, I can still only guess at what the extent of pressures that they're facing, and if there are still these pockets of resistance, whether it's a Geo Baby or an Anubhav Sinha or Sudhir Mishra or Vetrimaran, if considering that all these people still exist 10 years, 11 years after the BJP came to power, I think gives me a lot of hope. So yeah, firmly hopeful.
Well, Anna, I want to thank you so much for leaving us on that optimistic note, especially when things can feel so bizarre and the gaslighting can be so intense, as you said. And, no matter how bad things get, we are all very grateful for your voice to help us cut through the noise and see through everything, and to help us make sense of the absolute rubbish situation we find ourselves in, and to bring the politics right back to art where it belongs. Thank you so much, Anna Vetticad, for joining us.
Thank you so much for your
Um,
kind words about my work, and of course for the solidarity.